Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. We've had terrible trouble trying to get on air, and it was working fine up until 10 minutes before this show. Chris has rebooted, and we're going to speak to Sandy tomorrow. We thought we were going to be able to speak to Sandy tonight, but as usual, or as happens often with Windows on the World stuff, there's usually a mad panic before everything gets back to normal again. We often have this with the talks as well, but it's usually all right on the night. I hope you can hear us. So, can you hear us all right out there? If you can, just let us know. I think you probably can. I can hear myself. And we've got Chris here, and he's going to be joining us. I did the challenge show earlier today. We're talking already all about this control system, the way it works, how it really works. There's one template being rolled out everywhere. The public are being pushed into a kind of container. The container is climate change. The container is the accepted public narrative. And when you go outside that, then guess what happens? You get demonized. You're far right. You're a Trump supporter. I bet you voted for Brexit. This happened to me the other day. We're going to get into that a bit later. Chris, are you there? Can you hear me?
I can just about hear you. I can hear every fourth word is sort of blotted out. But right, I think we'll go on. I hope someone in the chat room can tell us whether they can hear us both okay. If we're both okay.
We're both okay up there. Please let us know.
Hello. Is there live out? Is there anyone out there?
This is like that SETI. Do you remember that? Like they're trying to get some alien.
That's right.
Vibration from outer space, and yeah, it's us. You know, we've shut down the SETI program.
I thought I was going to be abducted.
Well, I was abducted and taken to the planet IKEA and forced to assemble myself. Sounds okay, Mark. It's a bit jumpy. All right, let's carry on anyway. This is going to be a bit
carry on
regardless. I was on Richie Allen's show earlier on. We talked about really the controlling of the narrative. And the other day, I did a very interesting experiment. There's somebody who's inside the narrative of controlled opinion. In other words, they believe that the climate change agenda is not an agenda and actually really happening, and there's no agenda behind it. And they also believe most of the stuff that comes out of the mainstream. Now, the thing is, it's quite interesting this, because what's happened is over the past few years, you've now got this kind of narrative that goes on. Whenever you jump outside the mainstream narrative, you're a Nazi, you're far right, you're an extremist, or you're a conspiracy theorist. And this is just basically psychological programming. This is a psychological warfare program that's come out of the government. The British government are brilliant at doing psychological operations on the public. They do it all the time. Well, take a look at the BBC. It's a psychological operation. And the interesting thing about this is that, say you go to a really kind of ex-communist country, people there will know that the mainstream is programming them. Here we have a danger because people don't believe that generally. There's a huge section of the public that think that the BBC works in the public interest and mainstream Reuters, Associated Press works in the public interest. Well, it works for the common good. But the common good and the public interest are two very different things. The common good is all about what keeps society in place and stops dissent. And we're living in times now where it's become draconian. The actual rollout of this is so childlike in its simplicity. But the people who have been mentored into the accepted corridor of opinion are also acting in a very childish and petulant way. Now, I did sort of engage with some people the other day, and they put up a post about the bushfires in Australia. And I said there might be something more behind this. It's not just climate change. Of course, I was a conspiracy theorist straight away. And then I started explaining what it was really about, a thing called the Global Environmental Facility, which came about in 1987. And it came out of a thing called the World Wilderness Congress. And this conference was arranged by a fella called Maurice Strong, who, guess what, is an oil billionaire. So I threw all this stuff in, that the climate change agenda was promoted by an oil billionaire, and they then came back and said, well, how could this be? Because if you're talking about land grabs, then there's no money in that. And they didn't understand the fact that I was talking about a control system. This is a big problem because the public think that the control system, the system, is there for their own good. It's there for the common good, which means that it has to be seen to be there for the right reason. In other words, the financing of the country depends on people thinking in a certain way. And that's called the common good. So that we were talking about all that earlier on Richard Allen's show. And I've got Chris with me here tonight. So, Chris, yes, can you hear me?
I can just about hear you. It's a bit difficult. Yeah, I was every word, but you were saying about this common good. I've got this theory, and it would probably be for Edward Dutton to sort of look into it a bit further. But this theory is that humanity is a bit like when we're children. Now, when we're kids, we believe. I used to believe, and I think most people are the same. Everything your parents said was correct. And your political views were the same as your parents, their views, somebody they didn't like, you didn't like them. And it's when you became a teenager, you suddenly realised, you thought, well, hang on a minute, not quite right with this, you're not quite right with that. And you started to think.
Well, you've frozen up completely there, Chris, but I know exactly what you're saying, because we had a discussion the other day. In other words, that the UK has been reduced to a 9-year-old child. And then we've got the US, which is about the same. And Chris made a point that France has grown up into a rebellious teenager. These are just analogies. We're talking about the present moment in time, really. We're not talking about over history. We're talking about what things are like now as an analogy. And it's very true, because in France, the people actually know the level of corruption that's going on. And they've never given up protesting against Macron. Now, they've tried to infiltrate these processes have been infiltrated, and it's never worked. So I think that's a really interesting thing, that the persistence level in France is much, much higher. And I think we've lost Chris altogether. Hopefully he'll get back in. But yes, it's very interesting at Windows Towers, because I do find this happens a lot. And if I was more paranoid, I'd say they're out to shut me down. But I'm not paranoid, and I know they're not really. But there's always seems to be problems. It's kind of funny, because when we do the talks, we often have these kind of last-minute things that go wrong just before the talk starts. And there's this moment of excitement. It's a bit like I used to be in music. And this often used to happen as well. You'd get to a gig and something would get in the way of the performance, the PA would break down. But always at the last minute, you manage to pull it together. So we pulled it together, and it's just me now. So hello, everybody who's in chat. Greg, Silverado, nice to see you in chat. Huffman Aviation, Kate Buckley, Swinderby. Hello, Swinderby. Very poor sound from Mark. It's a stream to listen to. Well, no change there then. Well, we're not having a very easy time of it tonight, but we said we'd run the stream. I think Chris has disappeared forever. But not paranoid, mate. It happens, I'm sure. Well, it certainly does. Everything was perfect before this, It was absolutely perfect. But getting back to this, what happened? It was quite funny, really. This friend from a long time ago who used to work in the music business, and I used to go and see his shows. We were very pally, always had a good laugh. I found that when I got into my research, then I joined the People's Voice TV, and as time went on, these people grow a little distant from you, and you look at the sort of things that they post on their social media, and you think, oh my God, do they really believe that? And this happened the other day. Something actually happened where there was, hang on, I think Chris is back. I'll just add him.
Hello, I can hear you.
Oh, you're back.
Hang on a moment. I've got just do some delicate.
What are you doing?
Right. Right, that's it. I think I can hear you now.
I think I can see you as well.
Hey, we're back. I'm sorry, okay. I think I was stopped in midstream there, but I don't wish to interrupt. You were talking there. Do you want to sort of bring me in a little bit sort of later, or?
Okay, so let's get back to it. And what I was saying was I spoke to this friend of mine. Last time was probably about 9-10 years ago. Puts things on Facebook. He put some very fear-mongering load of nonsense out the Independent that's written by some ex-military person who said the world's going to end in 50 years' time. There's a huge apocalypse, nature's going to collapse, etc., etc., etc. So I said that basically it's part of an action plan, and there's more to it than meets the eye. Next thing, I was a right-wing conspiracy theorist. Then I'd voted for Trump. Then I voted for Brexit, even though my name's not on the electoral register. I don't know how they knew that. And then I'm getting demonized from all sides. Okay? And it was almost like professional trolling. Now, I explained to my friend what it was all about, that this came out of the World Wilderness Congress in 1987. They set up a thing called a Global Environmental Facility, which was, in effect, a World Bank which was about conservation. So basically, it's about the rolling out of mitigation. Mitigation's where the money is. And we're seeing the results of all this now in that Mark Carney's been made head of this World Conservation thing. And it's all going to bankrupt businesses who don't comply. Businesses won't get any business if you don't comply with these new strategies that have been basically put in by the City of London. And it's all done on the back of sustainable development. But the thing is about this is it's a control system. And most people have a huge problem with this because they think, I'm not being controlled. And the absolute arrogance of the British middle classes is that the state wouldn't lie to them. And this is a huge problem because what they'll do is they ask for accredited sources. And then what happens is you give them sources and they go, oh, that's off the internet. You get these absolutely wild things coming back. And then it got on to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. You know, the usual 97% of scientists agree, etc., etc., etc. So I then send in a paper by Niels Axel Morner, who's one of the world's leading experts in sea levels, on why he left the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And he'd been an expert panelist on there many times. He contributed to the AR reports. That's these reports they do every couple of years about the state of the planet. And he's basically saying, this is anti-science, I'm not doing it anymore. So I sent that to this person. And then I sent another document about the bushfire in Australia and not being caused by climate change by an equally eminent scientist. And guess what? He blocked me. So this is what happens. It's kind of incredible. And so you've got this kind of petulance that if you're outside the control narrative, then you must have voted for Trump. You must vote for Brexit. And you think Elvis's brain is on the moon. And then this fella actually had the cheek to say that he said, it's a shame people like him are able to vote. He voted Brexit. And he probably knows about as much about Europe as his holiday to Costa del Sol on a Thomas Cook package trip, right? So he completely pigeonholed me. And when I sent in these documents and I said, oh, what happened was, as they got more and more insulting, I got more and more polite. And I said, no, here's some information. Here's how it goes into local things, through things like Savills Complete Streets, through Bechtel and Lendlease. Bechtel and Lendlease are these multinationals who are taking over the infrastructure in London. For instance, there was a thing called the Haringey Development Vehicle, where half of Haringey came under the ownership or stewardship of Lendlease. This was all found out by a chap called Gordon Peters, and he took them to the High Court. And Claire Covert, leader of Haringey, had to resign. So I went from macro to micro. Okay, so we started off the world and the way it's being controlled through the climate change agenda, and I did this in several paragraphs. So I gave them sources that they could look at and references. They ignored all that and chose to demonize me. And once they demonized me, they blocked me. Now, what I did at the end was said, this is part of an experiment, looking at how people are interacting with the media. And the findings will be published quite soon. Well, I'm talking about it tonight, and I will be publishing it on Windows on the World. We did a talk about this kind of thing on Sunday. I'd like to bring Chris in now. Are you there, Chris?
Hello, Mark. Yes, I hope I am. I hope everybody can hear me. Well, shall I think I'll just start and repeat what I said earlier before I was cut off in my prime. And that is this demonizing of people. If we go back to our childhood, and as I said, it'd be probably something for Edward Dutton to look into. But when we go back to our childhood, I believe almost everything my parents said. I had the same political views. If they didn't like someone, I didn't like that person either. And because they were your parents, they were, they were senior to you, and your view of the world was just around where you lived, and that was it. Well, when you step out into the big wide world, you sort of learn a few things, and you become a teenager, and you look around and think, well, hang on, they're not quite right with this, they're not quite right with that. And you start to ask questions. Now, going back to our childhood, I don't know if you remember this, but when you was a kid, you'd always, if you was a boy, you'd be afraid to be labelled as a sissy. You don't, you sissy. What's the matter with you? You sissy, or you're a coward. And then in the 70s and 80s, if you said anything that people didn't like, you were a communist. Oh, he's a commie. He's a right old communist. But then when the Berlin Wall came down, you went from being a communist when the East moved to the West, and we got this mutated communitarianism, or whatever you want to call it, what we've got now. Now you're a Nazi, because I don't remember in the 70s, 80s ever being labelled as a Nazi. But now you're labelled as a Nazi. But going back to what I was saying earlier, as we're growing up, I think that if you look at your own childhood, or generally childhood, you know, when you're about 8 to about 10 years old, yes, you'll believe everything your parents say because they're right. You know, that my dad's always right. But then you get to your teenage stage, and then you start to enter into the big wide world, and you become more educated, you learn much more things, and you start to question things. Now, I think society in France has just reached its teenage years. That's why they've got the yellow vests, because they're looking at the authority figures and saying, hang on, they're not quite what they're cracked up to be. And they haven't got an overall leader. And that's very important, because people always like to have a kind of a god that they work to. Oh, yes, yes. Like when I was a kid, my mother and father, well, they're always right, you know. And I think that in Britain, we've just reached about 8 to 10 years of age. And that's why we're acting in many ways, not everybody, but the general consensus is acting like children. And that is partly due to ideological subversion, because it's funny that with this man-made global warming hoax, what have they got leading it? A 16-year-old girl, and people that are not particularly bright. People that read.
Chris, I've got to correct you there. She's 17 now, by the way.
Sorry? Oh, 17. Sorry.
17.
But, you know, she had a birthday then, I know. But really, Tony Blair's going to be a spokesman on it. He's going to be a spokesman on climate change. Now, what the bloody hell, excuse my language, does he know about the climate? I mean, if they had someone like Niels Axel Moron or, say, Piers Corbyn, then we'll probably know the truth. But they don't want the truth to come through because, as you know, and I know, and most of the people in our chat room know, man-made global warming is nonsense. It's all to do with the old dosh. It's the old money. And but I just wondered, what do you think about this idea that I think that we are like going through a stage of a human being where we are about 8 to 10 years old in this country, and in France they've reached their teenage years, and that's why they're rebelling. Do you think there's something in that?
I actually talk about that before you came back on. I made that point that we're going to talk about it. It's very true. And what I find very interesting about this is that people I know who are from 40 to 60 years old are these 8 to 10-year-olds. It's amazing. Yes. I never thought I'd be able to see this happen, because years ago, I remember when I was sort of growing up and getting into music and all that, there was a variety of opinions about. The music business always tended to be very lefty. And it was still controlled then. I mean, all of those organizations which kind of took over music, you know, they were a bit like the sort of, it was like a sort of a lesser version of Soros in a way. You'd get these things like the Campaign for the Nuclear Disarmament, Rock Against Racism. These were the kind of, they sound very worthy causes. But what I saw with that was it was the beginning of this template in a way. In other words, you are part of this narrative, and then you realise that a lot of these organisations, it's like the Socialist Workers' Party, they still carry on, but they're like something out of a bygone era. But the point is, I push a lot of stuff that they would say, oh, that's okay. But because I push other stuff, like I'm against the climate change narrative, they will not speak to me. In fact, one tenants meeting we went to, myself and Piers Corbyn, he said, oh, Social Workers' Party here, you know, Socialist Workers' Party. And I said, oh, I don't mind interviewing them. And I said to the woman from the Socialist Workers' Party, I said, yeah, if you want to do something, let me know. She goes, oh, I can't, I'm very busy, and ran off. So what you find is that you're very nice to these people and they run away. And I found this is a really weird thing. And a lot of these people are 40 to 60 years old. And this happened the other day, and these people that I know, they're definitely in their 50s, you know. And I did a bit of a bomb, really. I threw a hand grenade in to their belief system. And then I just waited for the effect. And of course, there was a retaliation because I'd basically ruined their worldview. And that can't be done. But the way they react is like children, because they get very petulant, they get angry, and then they undermine you and start calling you names. And then when you send them the information, say, look, you are wrong about this, or you might be wrong. Have you ever considered that this might be the case? Then they block you, because they can do that on social media. So I was blocked. And I did say that this was part of an investigation. Thank you for being part of this investigation. I am going to put the findings of this out quite soon. So I suppose that kind of sounds to them a bit, oh my God, you know, I said all this stuff back. So they've all kind of slandered me and basically undermined me and said that my only experience of Europe was a Thomas Cook package holiday to the Costa del Sol. Well, I've never been to the Costa del Sol, and I've been to a lot of East European countries, and I've been all around the world, really. But this is a very interesting thing. So I think we've got this real problem with the middle classes, or what used to be called the middle classes. I think that kind of term doesn't mean much anymore because a lot of them are struggling as well. But I think the point is that there's now a hive mind consensus, and they are absolutely brainwashed. And I never thought I'd see this happen so quickly. I think that's the point, Chris. Yeah, about the speed at which it's happened.
Because when you think about it, when you look at the age group, it's the rock and roll generation. It's a generation that were in their teens, say, in the 50s and 60s and possibly 70s. Now, you think the 1950s, they had national service, and they said, yes, sir, straight away, yes. And you look at the films of the 50s, it's all upper-class people saying, oh, look, there's something dangerous to do in the war. We better get a working-class chap in and get him killed, you know. And it's all everybody saluting and doing what they're told. And there's a big class structure in this country, which didn't happen so much on the continent. Less so in Germany and in France and that. But there's an enormous caste structure which was only broken down in about the 1970s, really. And that generation are the sort of generation that did what they were told. And if a newsreader came on the television, on a flickering black and white television, and said, Russia is going to bomb us in 5 minutes, they believe it, or they believe everything, you know. And I think that is the difference. And I think that's why they're going now for children. You notice they're going around the schools, brainwashing them with these, or terrifying them rather, that the world's going to end in 10 years if we don't all live like medieval paupers. You know, this is the nonsense. And I think that they realise that there's this generation in between, like our generation, where we were sort of, our youth was just at the end of the yes or no sir brigade. And then we sort of start to come into the rebellious years of the sort of 70s and 80s. So we're a bit halfway between the two. But I'd say to our viewers, you look at the films from the 50s and look at society as it was then, and it was very class structured. You look at any film of the 50s, it'd be class structured. That's about a war or just society generally. 60s, very different. 70s, extremely different from that. So I think what we've got to remember is we've got a generation from the do what they're told brigade, and they thought they were rebellious in the 60s, but I just wonder, were they? Because when you look at the hippie movement, I used to think, I mean, I was very young at the time, but I used to think, oh, isn't it lovely? Peace and love and flower power. Oh, gorgeous. Well, I didn't realise that it was the brainchild of the KGB to undermine the West.
Well,
so
it's an interesting point. I think you've made a good point, because, yes, these things are socially engineered to a great extent. And what happens is that the people within these movements don't think that they're being steered. But in actual fact, you see, the thing is, I think people get this a bit wrong in that they go, oh, it was all mind control. Well, no, it wasn't all mind control. I don't think like bands like the Grateful Dead were completely a creation of the intelligence services. I mean, it's absurd to say that, right? But I know people who've met them and worked with the spin-offs, people like the Flying Burrito Brothers and all these people. And they were first and foremost musicians, but they became very focal. and they were promoted. Now, why were they promoted? That's what you have to ask yourself. But if you look at some of those bands, I still like them. You know, like I was watching the Grateful Dead and Bob Weir and all that lot. They do these things. It's called couch tour captures, and they went around America to these small clubs just doing these amazing gigs. And their music is very off the wall. I like it because it's not formulaic, and it often goes into areas that musicians wouldn't even go into. For instance, they would strip away the whole key structure of a song, and you would be left with this kind of, not a dissonance, but a very interesting melodic structure. And I think things like that is creativity. But you have to look at the memes of the times. Also in this country, I got to meet a lot of the people from the 60s, and I actually worked with them. I got to know people like Jet Harris, who was in the Shadows. I made a film with Jet, and actually you can download that from the website. And I'm not trying to sell it here, but it's very interesting in the respect that he was a real kind of innovator. He was an interesting person, and he was promoted. And the people who are promoted generally get co-opted. But he was a real rebel. He left. He had to leave the Shadows. He had a lot of years of drinking, and he was known as a bit of a wild character. But it's a very interesting fella, because when I talked to him about what we talk about, the engineering of society, he agreed with it entirely, and he knew what was going on in the courts, which I thought was fascinating. I played him a film of when we went into court, called Council's Courts and Con Men, about the way that the court gets jurisdiction. And he was sat there watching it going, yeah, I'll get it. So that's, yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's yeah. And that's really interesting. So I think you've brought a good point here, because a lot of those people in the 60s, another friend of mine, Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders, he's from Manchester. And I met him at that Bilderberg protest. And he was one of the people from the 60s I'd never met. And I knew a lot of those other people. I'd worked with them. Our drummer, Matt, who died a few years ago, used to do tours with us. It's called a Solid Gold 60s tour. So I saw Wayne Fontana at the Bilderberg thing. I think it was 2012, was it? Something like that. And he had this badge on, Solid Gold 60. So I said, oh, hello. And he goes, oh, hello. And he had a big question mark. He was holding a question mark up as cars were going past as to what's this, right? The Bilderberg protest, which actually was funded by Goldman Sachs, by the way, because the police told us that. So as I said earlier on Rich's show, you get your protest, but it's organised by the state. There's nothing outside that. As long as you know that, you do know that, don't you? And I met him there, and he had a most amazing story, and he's a really rebellious character, because he got bankrupted, and it was over a parking ticket. He started with a parking ticket in Drury Lane. And the bailiffs came round to his house, wanting £700, and he actually paid the first lot. And he reckoned that another company came round for the same ticket. And what happened was, he said, well, I've already paid you. Just let me out. I want to go to the town to get a pie. And they were just stood there going, no, Mr. Ellis, you owe us £1,013.75. And he said, I've already bloody paid you. So he said, I've been cleaning the drive, and I had this little bottle of white spirit. Petrol. No, he said petrol, that's right. So I had a little bottle of petrol. And he said, well, what I did was, I was so annoyed. I poured it all over the bailiff's car on the bonnet, and the fellas were got there going. And he said, I got my lighter out, and he said, it wouldn't light. He said, it's typical, isn't it? He said, and by some divine intervention, I threw the lighter at the bonnet, and the whole bloody lot went up. Right? But he said, and then there was fire engines coming. I said, what do you mean there's fire engines coming? He said, well, there's 3 cars on fire at this point. Mine was in the middle. So he's got this. And then he said, the police arrived. And he said, what happened? He said, well, I told them. And I said, the 2 rats who were responsible for this are running up Other Stage Road. And so he ended up in court, and you can see it. It's called Wayne Fontana at Bilderberg, I think, and it's on one of our sites.
I've seen it. It's
YouTube
good.
Channel and free. Yeah, well, I'm just saying for the people, right? Because it is very funny. And so he went to the court, and he dressed up as the woman of justice with the scales. He had a big toga on, and he made this big imitation spliff coming out of his mouth just to really annoy him. And he was carrying it was a broom handle with two colanders on, right? So a broom handle with a colander at either end, suspended by chains, and that was the scales of justice, you see. So he went into court dressed like that, and the court said, Mr. Ellis, that's his real name, he said, Mr. Ellis, you're treating this court like a pantomime. And Wayne said back to the judge, he said, well, it's you wearing the wig and the tights. He said, right, 6 months. put me down straight away, but that was a summary judgment, you see. And then he got bankrupted when he was out of the country. And the official receiver took about 20 grand up front. And he said, look, I'll pay you the money I owe you. I was in Spain. So he learned that the system works in a particular way. And I became very friendly with him. I've got an interview I'd like to put out that I did with him about a year ago. And he did this gig in Sheerness in Kent. So I went to see him, and that's when we did this interview. It was about a year and a half ago. And we went for fish and chips. They had the band with them. I knew everyone there. It was a kind of OAP's night out. They have a little theatre there called Criterion Theatre in Sheerness, in the old Blue Town bit. And so he said, oh, I like it round it. And it's like going back to the 50s down there, but it's like the 50s left in 1980, if you know what I mean. But, it's kind of interesting. And he understood a lot of the things that we talk about. So I think there was a rebellious spirit in a lot of those 60s people, not all of them. But I don't think it was as controlled. I think that was the point we were trying to get to, Chris, wasn't it?
Well, yes, it does control. But if you look at some of the programs that were on in the 1960s, for example, I think there were people were trying to tell us something that's going to happen. And I think it may have been a time when at least they had a little bit of freedom. For example, now The Man from U.N.C.L.E. was fiction. It looks like old rubbish, but it was two blokes against an organisation rather, against a mysterious organisation that's trying to take over the world. And most of these fictional sort of programs are about that, about something or someone that's gone bonkers and is taking over the world. Now, what's happened, 40, 50 years later, there's the New World Order as nutty as a fruitcake trying to take over the world. So really, those programs in the 60s, if you look at them now, and they're on YouTube, you can see The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and Department S and all those type of things, and look at the enemies that they're against. Just look at it as a New World Order. It's absolutely spot on. Somebody must have had a vision into the future in the 1960s. It's really uncanny.
Maybe Windows on the World needs to educate himself by reading some Anthony Sutton and Eustace Mullins. Well, I've read all that. I've got all Eustace Mullins books. I don't know what
Eustace Mullins, yeah.
Tonight. Well, yeah, I've read all the Eustace Mullins stuff, and some of it's very, very good. Anthony Sutton, this debates as to whether he's kind of the full ticket of what he's talking about. I mean, nobody's got the full picture. Nobody. I think putting the worldview into perspective is all you can do. And what we do, I think, with our shows is put it very simply. You have to actually describe this as a control and management system. And you can go into different levels of it. It works on different levels. It works on levels going up to the supernatural. But you cannot engage the public on that level. They will not want to know because they think everything's a conspiracy theorist, which is the point of the show, isn't it, really? And that's the whole thing we were talking about at the beginning, that to actually even get this stuff across is very difficult. And I get opposition when I'm talking about the co-opting of the new age and what that's about, and they all think it's negative, that you're describing it as some kind of business plan, which it is, and it came out of the whole idea of the Gaia worship and all the rest of it. It depends how far you want to go with it. This stuff goes very deep, and I've read stuff for about 30 to 40 years. I've got a huge library of stuff, but what you have to do, in my opinion, is sort through it and sift through it and cherry pick the information which is gold dust. And that, to me, is the most important thing. And that's what I try and do with the Sunday shows. These things during the week are a bit ramshackle tonight, so we've had a bit of a ramble. But the point is that it has to be brought down to a simplistic level, because nothing that's successful, no management concept or business plan that's successful is complicated. It won't work. It has to be simple. And that's a bit like, say, what should we call this? Sustainable development. It can mean anything we want. Let's call it sustainable development. No one's going to go against that. So all of these things are extremely simple. When they talk about vibrant, diverse communities, we know what that means. People who listen to the show, anyone who's just listening for the first time, vibrant means dull. And, this is the whole point of it. Everything's backwards. Diverse means everything's going to be the same, because through diversity, you get people into a situation where they have to all think the same. It's very, very simple, this stuff. These are psychological management concepts, and the people who know most about this are the Soviets or ex-people from communist countries, because they were party to this kind of system. What we're talking about now is a much bigger system. It's a global system. Communism, you can't roll that out again. It got a bit unpopular. So you need something that's bigger than communism. And we've talked about this in the shows as well. So I'm very grateful that the people who send in stuff from all over the country and the world, we've got listeners now all over the world, and they send me in stuff which backs up what we put out, but nothing that I put out hasn't been backed up. So I don't just sit in a room writing and kind of theorizing about things. What I'm doing all the time is trying to simplify things into a structure that, well, first and foremost, I can understand. Because if you can't relate something simply, it's like going into court, Chris. If you go into court, and I've been to the Royal Court of Justice many times, if you go and see a master, they'll say, yes, what do you want? How can I help? And if you can't explain yourself within a couple of minutes, forget it, because they're there to give remedy. Now, the corruption in the High Courts, once you get Crown Court, is absolute. But lower down, the administrative level, administrative courts, you can do something about it. I've got a case, a friend of mine, funny enough, phoned me up today from Spain, and he got raided by British Transport Police 3 years ago. And if you go to Windows on the World YouTube channel and windowsontheworld.net, you can find it. British Transport Police, bogus police raid, I think it's called. Now, he phoned me up today, that fella, and he had to leave the country. And the case that I've had to deal with in the High Court over the past few years has proved to me that at the high end, the level of manipulation is known by most people who are working in it. However, there are certain bits of leeway that are given to people who can present an argument. And the whole point of anything is to get it down to simplicity, something that is easy to understand. If you can't present your evidence in court very simply, it won't get anywhere. Now, I'm not saying the courts aren't corrupt, because they're 100% corrupt at certain levels, not at every level, but because I've won several court cases. But I think this is a very important thing in that people are compartmentalized into very small areas. And the idea of the education system is to direct and prevent change in the individual. That came out of a book called The Principles of Secondary Education by Alexander Inglis in 1918. You can download that off the internet. And yes, the purpose of education is primarily to prevent and direct change in the individual. Now, the thing is about this is that I didn't have access to high levels of elite information when I was at school. Obviously, right? I went to a secondary school, and my schooling was very messed up. My father died when I was quite young, and we moved to North Wales. And the schools there were behind the schools in Manchester that I'd been to. And it was a very difficult situation. So I lost interest more and more at school. And by the fourth and fifth form, I had huge gaps in my kind of schooling, because I used to play truant a lot and basically not really do the work, because I saw what was going on in school. And I thought, this is mostly of no use to me. This information that I'm being taught is going to be of no use to me whatsoever. So what I did then was I got to 16, bought a drum kit and left school. Great career move that was. But you just went off there, Chris. I was just talking about my sort of early experience. But it's about this idea of having access to information. And everyone has got access to information. I've taught myself an awful lot about dealing in the courts, and then I met other people who were doing it. It's about 10 years ago. And we formed a little network, and we were all sharing information. And then I started meeting people who were much higher up, top barristers, people who worked in the system. And I would be having conversations with these people, and I would be able to communicate with them, and they go, yes, you're making a good point. You have a good argument. They were starting to treat me with respect, because they speak to each other and express themselves in a completely different way than a lot of the rest of the population. And then you can get to another tier of it, which is the real elite system, which is the trivium and learning grammar, logic, rhetoric, having an argument, being able to put things over. Because if you look at a lot of people who've been in public school, they're not that intelligent. They can just sound intelligent. They can present themselves. And that's what it's about. It's about salesmanship. All they're doing is selling themselves. Right. I learned an awful lot from legalese, court speak, what judges say. there's certain words that are very important, like, are you acting accordingly? You know, are you presenting your evidence competently? Being competent is an incredibly important word in law. If you show competency, then you are showing that you are not an imbecile, that you're not a ward of the court, and all this stuff. I found this fascinating stuff, but it goes through the whole of the system. And the people who go to these elite schools learn this stuff. And it goes back to this idea of aristocracy, of royalty, and all this stuff. Now, we don't need to get into all that. I wouldn't mind going into bloodline stuff on a different show. We don't need to do all that. Because in my opinion, the British aristocracy lost the plot years ago. First of all, when the Normans invaded. I mean, they basically gave themselves away, you know? Whereas if you look at a country like Japan, the samurai defended it absolutely. And they would not they would not be subverted. And Yuri Bezmenov, you know, we talk about ideological subversion, makes a really good point on that. He said they would not be subverted. You see, the thing is, to subvert a society like they're doing and degrading it, and the rest of it, the population has to be willingly subverted, and you make them willing to be subverted by what you give them as their reality. And people in this country have no idea of reality. Yeah, you want to take over there, Chris, because I've been going for a bit. It's finished with tea.
Well, you made a very good point regarding Japan, because I've seen that loads of times with Yuri Brezhnev, what he said. You can't, well, you couldn't, I don't know about today, but you couldn't subvert Japan, because even now, and I'm going from memory now, I think they've taken in over the last couple of years one refugee, one asylum seeker. That's all they've taken in, because in Japan, the Japanese come first, everybody else comes second. And that can be said for a lot of countries. You know, but we've got this sort of, as you've said, since 1066, what people don't realize is that this country were treated like slaves. They didn't actually empty the battlefield of 1066. They left the corpses there because the Normans took over and stole everything from what were the English. I think it's called England then. And they actually changed everything. And people also don't realize is that they were only 2 generations from the Vikings, the Normans, 2 generations away. But they weren't a totally different culture, but they were here to steal off of us and turn us into slaves. And I think that's where our slavery attitude comes from, because it's always been yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir. It's the upper class who were the Norman gentry and the lower class who were the English. And I mean, the Romans did that to a certain extent, although they did sort of intermarry, and they weren't so, I don't think they were so iron raw as the Normans were. But really, when you going back to, you know, the generation things, what I've actually found, if you talk to people in a very simple way and you say, well, you know, look what's happening today, what they will do, I don't know whether other people have found this, they will regurgitate what the media has actually told them. Have you found that, Mark? They kind of do a regurgitation process. And if, for instance, you go up to these climate change people, and if you say something that's a little bit beyond them, I'm not talking to you, you're a Nazi, you're a denialist, you're a this, you're a that, you're everything else. And again, it's going back to your childhood, because when I was a kid, I was very interested in the Russian Revolution. I studied up about the Russian Revolution, but what I learned was from the official history books and not what really happened, because in the Russian Revolution, it wasn't Russians that started or ran the revolution. It was people that were actually financed from Wall Street and actually had apartments in New York. There were Ukrainians and all kinds of people that were trained to actually take over Russia. So the Russian Revolution wasn't quite as we're officially told. Now, if somebody had come along and told me then, when I was about 13 or 14, what I know now, I'd gone, oh no, that's rubbish. No, I've read it in the book here. Look, this professor says this, that professor says that. So I think, you know, we've all been through that stage where you will reject anything because you think what you've read is 100%. And I think, again, they're going through the childhood stage. The ideological subversion has brought people back to a kind of childhood mentality. And you look at these protesters, on was it Blackfriars Bridge, I think it was. And when they get old and they see films of themselves now, I mean, what are their grandchildren going to say? Is that you, Granny, running around like an idiot on that bridge? You know? I mean, it's just, don't they feel embarrassed? Have they got any self-respect? I think this is another thing that ideological subversion has done. It's removed people's self-respect. People are not worried now about looking stupid or acting stupid, because I think stupidity is in, really. You've only got to go into a supermarket and put what's on the headlines, newspapers.
Willful stupidity, I think, is what you're talking about. Yes, willful stupidity is not the same as stupidity, because people can be stupid and not realize it. But there's a kind of willful stupidity. Oh, you don't believe in those conspiracy theories, do you? It's a kind of lazy way of acquiescing from an argument. And I remember this was kind of very fashionable from the 90s onwards, I think, in the late 90s. And it's sort of been all downhill since, you know, this kind of willful stupidity. And that has really gone into the media. And when I look at these people who write this stuff for The Guardian, and the kind of level of mentality and how things have gone downhill, it's happened really in about the past 10 to 15 years. But yes, we're in a time now where it is post-truth. I think actually we're beyond that. I think it's post-truth now. I think.
Well, yeah, look at George Monbiot. George Monbiot. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk across you, but George Monbiot. I mean, whenever I see him, I feel nauseous. I can't stand the bloke because he's dangerous. I mean, if he had a brain, he'd be very dangerous, because the things he's talking about with carbon credits and all this old nonsense, and he thinks he's so right. And going back to what you were saying about the public school types, you've got Stephen Fry, George Monbiot. They're so far, I'm going to be a bit crude here, so far up their own backsides.
Monbiot's evil, right? Monbiot's just evil. He's got an evil face, in my opinion. And he's just a conduit for evil things, you know. But he's also got that horribly whingy sort of face as well. He can't stand. I mean, he's got that sort of face that you think, if you saw him somewhere, you think, oh, I'm not. I bet he's going to be whinging and moaning about something and giving someone a hard time over trivia. Yeah. And guess what? He does. Yeah,
he does.
The other one, Stephen Fry. I mean, I did send him a message on Twitter, and I said, Stephen, is it true? No, hang on. Is it true that you are the world's most boring manic depressive? Because I've never, because he keeps going on, he's a manic depressive. Now, I've met people.
He gives other people manic depression.
The point is that when is he ever manic? When is he ever interesting? It's always boring, right? I mean, I don't get it. And then he's so witty. He's like Oscar Wilde, because he played Oscar Wilde in the West End. Like, when I see it, he got away with it. But the point is that he's not a man of wit. He has some rhetoric, but the stuff he comes out with it's all the kind of area that, I think I've gone offline. Yeah, I'm back again. It's all the kind of area that is the controlled narrative of public opinion. So it feeds back into it. And then what they do is they say, oh, he's so rebellious and he's a real scoundrel and he says things that other people... That's rubbish. He says exactly what the state is wanting him to say. Otherwise, he wouldn't be there. And I've actually almost fallen out with people over this because they're fans of people like that. I didn't really want to pick on him too much. I don't want to give him the oxygen of publicity, really. But the point is that these sort of people are just useful idiots of the state. They've got nothing, in my opinion, to offer. Now, I think these people are, they have their talents and all the rest of it. But yeah, what we've got is just one narrative, and that's what this show is about, really. How do you break out of that? And how you break out of that is, I think, with fact. Present fact after fact after fact. And I found that's the only thing that works. Okay, I did that experiment the other day, and I said all this stuff. I said, it's basically, I said, fires have nothing to do with climate change. This is the Australia thing. I said, UN policies, not clearing forests and removing fire breaks haven't helped at all. So in other words, I threw a few things in, yeah? So then this fella goes, really? He goes, again? He said, Australia has never had temperatures this hot in recorded history. Yes. Now, you can see the way it was going at this point. He said, it's also right under the ozone hole. Whatever your agenda is, right, you seem to be ignoring the glaring facts. Maybe you should consider remedial reading lessons My sister introduced one called Reading Recovery into the New South Wales education system to stop exactly the lack of reading comprehension you are displaying. Now, can you see where that's coming from? This person is a petty-minded tool of anything that's put in his head by authority, because it's all about appeals to authority. When I sent him real authority, real experts, right, who'd given up working for the IPCC because of the fraud and openly stated in a document, what do? They block you. It's not what they want to hear. So this is absolutely treacherous, this stuff. And basically, they started asking me, oh, who's the oil billionaire? I said, well, Maurice Strong, interesting bloke, died in China, involved in the oil for aid scandal. The term sustainable development came from our common future in 1987. He organised the first wilderness conference in 1987 and the Rio conference and the UNCED, which was the same thing, where it had different names, United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, which he was the head, in 92. I said it outlines the new global management system. Well, you can tell that this is going to start, that the coasts are going to start breaking down now. What do you mean the new global management system? You mean that you mean to say that the Tories and the Labour Party and those people who argue in Parliament aren't doing that? No, they're not actually. This is a new management system. I said, basically, they've been set up by the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, 98, to keep the business in-house with their own lobbyists. That's the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. And I said, I know many scientists who have been on the IPCC, which I do. It's basically a control system. And the UN control system is people, property, assets under the UN and World Bank. The World Bank is a trustee of the Global Environmental Facility. I threw in a big load of words, right? They lend out money to poor countries and sell them mitigation and renewables, all from China. When this fails, they take land and assets on the back of the debt, which was the whole point of it. Then I sent them the video of George Hunt. Now, if you haven't seen that out there, look at this video called George Hunt, UNCED, UNCED, the Globalist Plan Well Ahead, I think it's called. We did a show called The Man Who Saw the Future, featuring Edmund Rothschild and Maurice Strong giving speeches there, along with a fellow called David Lang, who's a Montreal banker. And David Lang said, we need to take an elitist approach here. We cannot sell this to the cannon fodder and roll it out as in any kind of democratic process. We don't have enough time and they won't understand it. I'm paraphrasing there, but that's basically what he said. Now, the thing is, if these sort of people who think that my only engagement with Europe is voting Brexit and go to the Costa del Sol, which is basically, I mean, that's why I'm quite annoyed with these people, yeah? It's because they will not even entertain something in any way that has any kind of consideration. In other words, that's a legal term, consideration. Okay, I'll give your argument consideration. I've given your argument consideration and it fails on these 2 points. Can you now address those 2 points? This is called an argument, okay? This is a back and forth argument. But because they can't argue and they've lost the ability to, I don't know whether they ever had, they literally throw their toys out of the pram. So they start calling your names, then the toys get thrown out of the pram, and then they go, I'm never speaking to you again. And that's it, you know, I mean, it's incredible. So basically, I sent this fella, I said, I've sent you documentation from a world-leading IPCC panelist about their fraudulent process, also a paper on why fires have nothing to do with climate change, right? Can you supply me with a peer-reviewed paper which proves that CO2 drives temperature? Not a computer model or a policy document, in brackets. Please be specific in what you require. Looking forward to hearing from you. That's it for now.
But you have nothing.
Well, the thing is, it's also a bit strange because all this is on open social media, on their Facebook link. I then sent him a personal message with 2 attachments and that message. And then I sent him a message the next day. And I said, unfortunately, there has been no comment on the papers I sent to you and the other respondents. Using a legal term there. In other words, you're a respondent, you're required to respond, right? The comments in this thread have been more than useful, though, and will be featured as examples of their type. Thanks for participating. We'll send you the links. Blocked.
Well, but have you noticed, Mark, that these so-called celebrities and people we're supposed to look up to, they don't have an original thought. They read the script. Now, as you've often said, you know, David Attenborough reads the script. And when you look at, Greta Thunberg, she reads the script. And Stephen Fry reads the script. Now, have you noticed that Gervais talk that he gave? Ricky Gervais, yeah, thanks. Now, that was scripted, and my personal belief is that was scripted. He just reads the script. I don't like the fella. I find him rather creepy. But people are saying is to get people on his side. Now, he said about Epstein, and he mentioned about the Greta Thunberg. Oh, boy, educating that. So he's trying to get people inside. And what he'll do, what the script writers will do, they'll say, oh, Ricky, he knows his stuff. They'll gradually change his tune so it gets a percentage of people over to the way of thinking the way the New World Order wants them to think. Yes, and it's very clever subversion what he's putting out, I think.
Yes. This is called the allowed voice of dissent.
That's right. Controlled opposition.
You have to make it look as though people are you've got a few renegades, right? Now, this never happens. I'll tell you why. Because ex of mine, she works for the BBC. And I've met lots of people who work for the BBC, okay? Now, what happens is they have parties, and they keep a very firm eye on people who go to those parties, because they look for how people react when they're drunk. Are they susceptible to drugs? Can they basically be a good change agent? And if you're a bit of a renegade and you're a bit uncontrollable, forget it. You will not be allowed there, right? And renegades get quickly chucked out. Now, the point is that he's the allowed voice of dissent. If he was really dissenting, then you'd never see him again. Because if he got up there something that was absolutely shocking, he would not be seen on television again. That's just a fact. It doesn't.
It's controlled opposition, isn't it?
People who got kicked off television, right? There's people in the past who I've met, won't give the names, but they've been kicked off television. Of course, people use David Bowie. There's a lot more than that, because I was writing comedy years ago, and I was working with this fella, and we did some shows up at the Edinburgh Festival. I met producers at the BBC. Some of them stole some of our ideas. I know a lot of people say that, but they did. It doesn't really matter now. It's of no issue. It's of no importance. The point is that you're talking about a very parasitical industry. You're talking about an industry that uses up ideas very quickly. It needs ideas all the time. Now, people who watch TV now go, that can't be true. There's nothing on there. Well, that's because there's too much of it now. In actual fact, good comedy ideas or good sitcom ideas are like gold dust. They're absolutely like gold dust. And all the best ones are written very simply. And this is the idea. It's that there's nothing on there that hasn't basically passed the intelligence services, okay? It doesn't happen. I mean, I've looked at this for 30 years. I was very involved with people in television, and I still know a lot of them. That's why I sent that thing out the other day, because those people are in television, they're in media, and they're the most brainwashed people on the planet. I mean, I've been to countries all over the world and never seen anything like that level of brainwashing. So it is kind of interesting. I think we've lost Chris again. But I was going to get onto this. There's a video on YouTube, and I think it was done last year, and it was called Russia's pundits on Greta Thunberg. If she wants to live an eco life, send her to the Amish community. That's the title of it, right? It's absolutely brilliant. And it says Swedish schoolgirl. Wait, I'll just see if I can get Chris back into the. I've got to add Chris again. There you go. I think you're back in now, Chris. But I'm just getting through this. Let's see what you think of this. This was written as a transcript of a video which was on YouTube. It was called Russia's Pundits on Greta Thunberg. If she wants to live an eco life, send her to the Amish community. Okay. Now, basically, it's a Swedish schoolgirl, Greta Thunberg, has launched a global climate strike and then threw a rant at the podium of the General Assembly. Combating global warming is becoming a big political and business project. Behind one unhappy girl, and this is a diagnosis, this is what the presenter said, by the way. Behind this unhappy girl, and this is a diagnosis, there are powerful PR specialists, profiteers, and politicians from around the world. The US Democratic Party is writing a Green New Deal, and it's very popular. The project makes socialists flinch and wonder if it's legit. Financial companies have declared a Green Marshall Plan. President Macron demands that transport companies stop using the Northern Sea route. This is some kind of collective insanity that began back in the days when a former US vice president and Democratic Party candidate, here they mean Al Gore, received the Nobel Peace Prize for topics related to climate change, right? So, now, wait a minute. It says here, the commentator then states, combating global warming is becoming a big political business project behind one unhappy, unhealthy girl, and this is not slander, this is a diagnosis. There are powerful PR specialists, profiteers, and politicians from around the world. Basically said, first you have to look at this girl. When I saw her, I thought about the Children's Crusades. I really thought of historical events. Then they play Greta Thunberg's nauseating and ham-acted speech, the one you're talking about, at the UN. Like, how dare you? You know, it's absolutely pathetic. The commentator says, I feel pity for the girl. She suffers from several diseases. She has had some problems at school. The girl decided to go on eco-strike. We have to look at the family. The family decided that the main enemy is global warming and CO2. Her father is a famous actor. Her mother, well, let's have a look at her. Then they play this video of Melina Ehrman, but it's actually not Melina Ehrman. It's a comedian who's doing an impersonation of Melina Ehrman, who's doing this kind of postmodern, pretentious, speak-singing thing, going through a supermarket and buying a pizza with these three women with face masks on, with little masks on, marionette masks.
I've seen that,
and all going, it's all very sort of pretentious now. And so they show that, and then they say the mother performed at Eurovision and took 21st place, right? And he says, and then he says, what an outstanding family! It's exactly how it looks. Now, this is very insightful and honest. You know, it says the girl doesn't fly on planes. It's not clear who paid for this, but she went on a luxurious yacht with the motor turned off, so not to harm nature. Now, obviously, the yacht she went on was called the Militia, which had been renamed from the Edmund de Rothschild E60. Edmund Rothschild is the financier of the global warming, along with Maurice Strong. Maurice Strong and Edmund Rothschild spoke at the 92 conference and the 87 conference, the Wilderness Conference, where he announced this bank, where the bankers got on board. And he said, Edmund de Rothschild, on that video, George Hunt, the elite plan well ahead, UNCED, on that video, he actually said, maybe we could put dry ice at the North Pole to cool it down. And this is just unbelievable. The bloke's having a laugh, you know.
Yeah.
And it's very eloquent. He's got that way of speaking, knows how to put it across, and he sounds like the archetypal English aristocracy. And that's the key. The cleverness is in the presentation. I brought in the Right Honourable Gro Harlem Brundtland, Prime Minister of Norway, to this conference. And thank you, Maurice, for that introduction. Please take it with a pinch of salt. I'm very humble, really. You know, this kind of thing. And it's all about the way they present themselves. But let's get back to this anyway. It says, it then goes on, for a month, the girl travelled on an eco-friendly yacht under eco-friendly sails, which are produced in a not-so-eco-friendly conditions. And one told this youngster that people invented the internet. No one told this youngster that people invented the internet. She could just stay in Sweden. She could just talk via the internet without moving 80 men, without involving so much money just to talk nonsense at the UN General Assembly. She doesn't have the slightest idea of what she talks about. And the world says the girl can see the atmosphere is polluted with CO2. She can see streams of carbon dioxide. She has special eyes. This is what her mother said. Are you crazy? Are you selling this to the world as the main event? I'm quoting verbatim from what this Russian thing said. Yeah, says, it's like saying I'm standing on the pavement and I'm wearing skis. Either the skis don't work or I'm crazy. What's going on here? Number one news around the world. Then this fella on the podium called Yakov Kedmi says, when children are deceived and used to satisfy some base perverse needs, this is called paedophilia. This is political paedophilia. They take a child and use her. Moreover, this is a sick child. Everyone involved is a criminal. They are criminals just like those who gave guns to children in Africa and sent them to war. They are criminals just like ISIS, which sent children to kill. They disfigure this sick child. They are trying to speculate on the feelings of infantile, primitive, and very naive people. Have they nailed it or what? It's incredible, isn't it? Now,
well, I think that's bigger political paedophilia. It's true.
Yes. He said, you were right about the children's crusades. They gathered them from across Europe, and children went with lofty purposes. The ones that survived were sold into slavery. This is how it all ended up. Now it's the same again, but a new level of development. It's almost dialectics. The Pope who did this must go, the people, sorry, my spelling, the people who did this must go on trial. They must be declared criminals because you shouldn't treat children like this. Everyone who uses children to pursue political goals is a criminal and they must be imprisoned. There are no such lofty goals for which children must be sacrificed. They mutilated her life. They took a child and turned it into this, and this is going to be worse. This is not the world has gone crazy, but some people have lost their last bit of conscience in pursuing their political aims. Trump is a good fellow. He listened to her and she said she was a good girl with a happy childhood and she was going to have a happy other life. The commentator then asked, by the way, the 80 men who worked on the yacht went home by plane. It was an eco-friendly plane. Behind some familiar names are, with this project, Soros and the Gates Foundation. So they named Soros and the Gates Foundation.
What a surprise.
Yeah, they invest in everything like this. I'm saying this because it was in open sources. In other words, you're the public. You should know about this. This is public record stuff. This is in the public domain. Why don't you know about it? And if you don't slander me because it's in the public domain. They're very clever in the way they put it across. This is a new form of attack on the existing situation, on the development of the world. Soros has one god, money. For the sake of money, he almost killed the British economy just to make another 2 billion. He doesn't care about anything else. He doesn't care about the child. He can make some money on this. It's very sad that there are people who play into his hands. The applause to these infantile degenerates instead of arranging trial for those who arranged this. They all applauded. Sorry, that's my kind of writing there. It's been translated, you see, so it doesn't come out quite perfectly grammatical. This is their trump card in the struggle between Republicans and Democrats. Trump moves production in the US, and she says this is all wrong. Everything should be eco-friendly. If she wants to be consistent, she needs to destroy humanity as a species, which is exactly what the Club of Rome want people to think we're doing. We're destroying the world, and as a species, we need to be removed. So basically, it said the environment will be just fine. There will be no people. There is no logic in what she says. She's not educated enough to talk about it. She doesn't need it. She can see streams of carbon dioxide. When everything she said in her childish infantile voice was said by the US Vice President, he received the Nobel Prize, talking about Al Gore there. Now she's been nominated to receive a Nobel Prize. We've had our own eco-friendly young man from St. Petersburg who went to Switzerland. And instead of studying, he's telling us we don't need any production facilities, that we live a wrong life. Send him to the AIM mission in the USA. Well, we can only give him a boat as he can't fly, and it ends there. Now, that was a bit lengthy, Chris, but can you imagine if that had been on the BBC? We're going over to Mr. Yakov in Russia, and he's going to talk about his impressions of Greta Thunberg's speech at the UN conference. Can you imagine if that went onto the BBC, the outcry that'd be in this country from the liberal, well, the so-called, the new fake left, whatever you want to call them, the hive mind, the idiots,
Precisely. And I mean, I earlier, about the middle of last year, I switched the radio on, and I'm terribly sorry. It was accidentally on BBC Radio 2. And there's the Jeremy, as you call him, Mark, Jeremy Vile program. And he was praising George Soros to the hilt, saying what marvelous things he's done and how he's helping humanity, blah, 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 blah. I thought, I couldn't believe my ears. And it just went on and on and on how marvelous George Soros is. Black Lives Matter. He's helping the underdog with his money, and what a marvelous person. And the BBC is not fit for purpose. To me, it's just a propaganda platform. That's all. And trouble is, people believe the BBC. They listen to it, and all this climate change garbage. You tune into any local BBC radio program, And sure enough, sometime in that week, they'll say, what are you doing to tackle climate change? Are you traveling less? Are you having holidays at home? All this old bullshit, which it's just bullshit. And they shouldn't be allowed to do that.
It's based on psychology, because you get those people coming in their tracksuits who are going to argue. And it's aimed at people who sit at home because they're unemployed or they've got nothing to do, because nobody would watch it otherwise. It's not for people who have any sense of purpose. You wouldn't watch it, right? So it's for people who go, oh, I want some excitement. I'm going to see them throwing things at each other and think maybe my life's a bit better than theirs because, at least I'm getting on with my family. And the thing is that what he does is he goes like, and you walked in here and you attacked him straight away. Now, why did you do that? And he sits back. And the whole point is, it's about creating a confrontation. It's like that. What was that show? Was it Jerry Sanders? And he stood at the back and he'd be going like this. I'm compassionate. I'm really watching this. Yeah. And that's what that Jeremy Kyle show's like. He just sits there and he's going. And then he takes the moral high ground. And he's going, wait a minute. You said last week you were going to stop taking drugs, okay? Everyone going, boo, 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 And it's absolutely ridiculous. But if that's the level of intelligence that's out there, well, why not cater for it? And that's what television is about. That's what that level of television is about. I mean, I think that, when did things really deteriorate? I mean, it got much worse when we got Channel 5. Do you remember that? I mean, Channel 5 is...
Channel 5 was terrible. I mean, I haven't had a television for 10 years. I booted it out. I just don't watch it. I haven't missed it. I just got fed up with channel hopping. No, I don't. And I don't miss it because all I did was channel hop because I just couldn't find anything suitable to watch. I mean, all it was the BBC channel was pushing homosexuality, and the Channel 4 and Channel 5 try out do the BBC on how revolting they can be. So I thought, well, I'm not going to watch all this political garbage because it just was it was childish television, nothing of any scientific or anything that you would broaden your horizons with. And as I've said before, I was watching a so-called science program about astronomy, and they brought on K9 dog or something, and they're talking to a model of a dog. And I thought, and there's Brian Cox on there as well, probably one of the most dim-witted academics you wish to meet. But if you notice, these people
answered our challenge. We actually challenged him, Brian Cox. We challenge you on climate change, And it's interesting actually because some of the comments that are on there, and he said, "You're not worthy. Cox is a legend." And you think, not many people say that. I don't think anyone's really actually literally said that, but you get the odd one. But most of the comments are negative. But it's interesting because, I mean, people refer to him. You see, the thing is, it's interesting because they call him Professor Brian Cox, don't they? And then he's Dr. Gail Bradbrook. It doesn't mean that they've got a brain cell between their ears. It just means they've done a certain they've got a doctorate or they've got a degree.
He's got good memory. He can memorize textbooks. That's what you can do. That's what you can do. And pass. I mean, you've got to have a certain brain to pass qualifications, but it doesn't mean to say you're intelligent. You can be the most dumbest person in the world.
Because the academic world, the way it works, is that yes, you learn things by rote and repeat them. But what it doesn't teach you is joined up thinking. But that's kind of another issue. I mean, we're going up on tangents here, which is okay. But I thought it was really important to put that Russian thing out because I've never seen something so honestly put together. When they called it political paedophilia, can you imagine what the outrage would be if that was said to these loony people, like the ones that try to engage with the dead? I mean, there would be a national outcry from these people. It's incredible.
Well, when you look at how much fantasy, when you look into some of the stories of I mean, I can't listen to the news anymore. I just find it too depressing, and it's deliberately depressing all the time to make you feel that things are getting worse. Oh, they're terrible. But when you look at the 60s, everything was optimistic. Things were looking forward. Oh, we're going to be happy. We're going to have happy shows and happy music, more creativity. But creativity now is stifled by money.
All of that was controlled too. However, the point is, yes, there was more of an upbeat kind of thing going on. And do you remember on the news where they used to have a happy story at the end, especially the regional news, and now a little happy story? And it'd be the cat stuck up a tree or something, and it'd been reunited with its owner, you know. But
tap dancing hamster.
Now it's all going to be, no, the apocalypse is getting worse, you know, all the time. And it has to be an apocalypse, because otherwise people wouldn't tolerate what's going to happen to them, you know. And it's kind of dead simple. This is what I don't really understand about it. Even when you lay it out to people, they will still not get it. It's like those idiots the other day, and if you're listening, idiots, yeah, it was about you, you know. I mean, but all that slander and marginalisation you did of me, I once again kept the moral high ground, by the way, you know. I mean, that's the point, is you just take the moral high ground and when you're dealing with these people, because, as we said at the beginning, they're mentored into being 9 to 10 years old.
That's right. I mean, I was in my car today, and I switched the radio on. That's about the only time I listen to the radio is when I'm in the car, and they had the tail end of the news, and I can't pronounce the name of that poor chap that's been assassinated by the Americans, the Iranian chap in Iraq. But they said, and Iran has said that they will do this. It's just like children in a playground, you know. Oh, the bully's just done that, and they said he's going to punch him on the nose. I mean, I'd like to know the truth behind that assassination, what it was really about, because I think the truth and what we're being told are completely two different things. You know, when you look at,
yes, the thing is with that
I don't know the truth of that. That's the thing.
Right. The thing is about that is that, in my opinion, this is a view, throw it out there, it's conspiracy theory, that Trump may not even have known about that until it was done. And it might be the deep state's way of saying, no, this is how you play ball. A bit like the old joke that when the new president comes in, they show him, they take him down to the basement of the White House, and they show him the D Plaza video. They say, any more questions?
Well, they reckon that Trump was they're supposed to brief the president in inverted commas, and I remember there's a picture of him, and he looked absolutely white as a sheet when he came out of being briefed. So whatever they said to him, perhaps Bill Hicks was right. You know, perhaps that's exactly what did happen. You know, because let's face it, they are chosen, the presidents. I'm sorry, they're not democratic.
Well, it's an interesting one because, and we should wrap up soon, but there's actually 113 people out there, so that's nice. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Hey, that's great, isn't it?
The point about this is that we're putting out quite a lot of information within the shows, but this is all a bit ramshackle at the moment, but it will get better as we go along. But we can't do anything about the streaming, and that was why we were late doing it. But as we said at the beginning of the show, this stuff always seems to happen. But I think that on a global perspective, there's something very interesting going on, because behind everything, the West is definitely going to be brought down. There's no doubt about it. I mean, if even Extinction Rebellion is saying it in their own documents, then they must have got it somewhere, right? Now, I think that there is going to be an escalation of all this stuff, and I think Britain, Israel, and the United States, this is going to be a partnership, as we all know, that is causing all of this global problem. Now, the thing is, I don't think that the real globalists are going to let these countries destroy, especially, I don't think that in the end that we're going to be ruled from Jerusalem. I don't think they'd let that happen. It's a really interesting thing, this, because looking into it, I've been studying a lot about the history of Israel and how we set it up. We are partners. That's the unfortunate thing, that we are business partners with these people, right? We set that country up. Now, the thing is that I think on a global perspective, there's something much bigger going on. I know it's not the aliens. There's something much bigger going on. And that's what interests me more than anything, because the actual conclusion to all this, it's going in a direction which is moving very, very quickly. So I think we are living in very interesting times. I want to get more into this. I mean, I don't want to comment too much on a lot of the things that are going on in Iran because I know about as much as anybody else. I've been getting my sources through the internet. I haven't studied it enough, and I haven't got any sort of real intelligence on it because nobody's in Iran's contacted me about it. And I do tend to get people sending me really good stuff, but this is a sort of developing situation. But it looks to me as though we've got this kind of escalating war in the Middle East again, and they obviously, Israel wants to attack Iran. They've been trying to do it for ages. Whether that's going to actually happen in the long run is an interesting one, because the bombing of these airports looks like a strategic thing. You know, it's a bit like when Trump bombed that Syrian airbase when there was nobody there, or, you know, it wasn't really manned. And maybe these things have been done. This deal's been done in the background. At the end of the day, the Saudis, the whole lot, the globalists together, doesn't matter whether they're based in Tel Aviv or Saudi Arabia, Britain or the United States. These people are manipulating things in a certain direction. And at lower levels, they appear to fall out. But at higher levels, I don't believe they do. And I say that because all of my research into this does point that way. So I think that's something to think about, you know, that basically, that when you're looking at the strategies and the way that the public can't understand what's going on because they think small and globalists think big. It's very, very simple. The public thinks small. These people may be working with an intergenerational plan, and it's linked up through family, it's linked up through belief, and they don't think the way the public do. They just don't. I mean, even social Darwinists don't. You know, even the British aristocracy, who are now a spent force, in my opinion, but don't know they are. They don't know they're a spent force. They don't know that everything's been taken off them. Some of them still think that they have some power. Well, look at the House of Lords. Most of those are kind of puppets, really. You know, they're not standing up for anything. And
I think the Queen is a puppet.
It's an interesting thing. You get this kind of attitude with a lot of these aristocratic people that, well, I don't think they'll let that happen and blah, blah. And actually, you've got nothing to do with it, pal. Your influence went 200 years ago, and they can't face it. What do you think on that, Chris, as it closing up?
Well, I believe that the royals, the Rothschilds, have actually infiltrated into the royals and other big banking families. And the royals are just there as puppets in many ways, because when you look at communism, for example, North Korea apparently is run by 6 families. You only see Fatty with a funny hairstyle, but there's 6 families that live in absolute ultimate luxury. And the communist system and the capitalist system are virtually the same, because it's a minority of people who are actual parasites that are living off the backs of everybody else, who rule things. And as I've said time and time again, governments do not rule countries. It's the bankers, usury scammers, and their multinational businesses that rule countries. Civil servants run countries, and governments are there to give you the illusion that they run countries, but they don't. That's it. That's an actual fact. Because if they did run the country, they'd do stuff for the people and not for their masters. And all the time, you know, all their policies are for their masters, not for us.
Well, you know, the thing is, that's a top-down system. So you've got an elite at the top, a huge administration. The administration's got bigger and bigger and bigger. The administration now includes NGOs. It includes corporations, and it includes the public and the private sector are both linked. So you've got from security up to the military, up to local councils, down to local councils, they're all being run by multinationals. So that's why when you've got G4S running the prison, or Serco, you've got, or Sodexo, you know, you've got these corporations running these prisons. They also are the people who will appoint you your lawyer. They are the people who will take you to prison, and they're the people who are running the courts at many levels. So what can possibly go wrong there? There's no difference between that and any totalitarian system. It is a totalitarian system, but it's a corporate system. So it's just, there's no difference. You know, I mean, I was talking to my friend today, and he said, oh, I haven't spoken to you for a few years. And he got raided by British Transport Police. It was a totally illegal operation. He proved it all in court. But there's nothing you can do about it at a certain level. However, we've been through such similar experiences within the High Court that I'm meeting him next week, and we're going to refresh on a few things. But he said very interesting things have been going on. So what I find fascinating about this is that there's those sort of people. I'm very lucky in that I've come across these sort of people over the years, stayed in touch with them, got a very good network of people who know what they're on about. So that's what to me is fascinating, is putting it together as a jigsaw puzzle. Who's actually doing what, why are they doing it, and how are they doing it? And it's very interesting. I mean, I find the system fascinating because I don't want to leave the planet not knowing about how it's run. I want to find out first. I want to say, well, we're on a farm. We seem to be farmed where we're basically owned, and you know, the perception is the state owns you. Of course, it doesn't. It owns the name and it owns your interactions to a certain degree. But the thing is learning how the system works, what you are in the system, because the system is what you actually have to interact with. If you don't understand it, you don't understand anything. And these people who block me on Facebook, these people who are sort of in this hive mind, they have no idea how the system works. And in a way, it's good. It's good for the society that we're in, as far as the controllers go, for them not to know. In other words, you don't need to know. It's not in the public interest for you to know how this world is run. It's not in the public interest to know that it's just being run by a few people on your behalf, and that all of the stuff that you're being mentored into is with your consent. Nothing is being done without your consent. You're consenting to it all. Okay, we're tricking you. We're saying there's a climate emergency. We're saying you're going to have to lose your house in the future. We're saying that you'll never fly again. But you're consenting to it, and you're saying, well, I shouldn't fly then, should I? I shouldn't drive. I am a blight on the earth, just like the Club of Rome told me I was. You know what I mean? And that's the way it works. There's nothing complicated about the system at all. It's intricate, I would say, but not complicated. But when it gets this deep state level, it's kind of fascinating because you get glimpses. I mean, I know for a fact that there was a conference recently. I'm not going to mention it because it would get somebody into trouble who's very close to me. But these globalist leaders, they're congregating all over the world all the time, basically. And I hear this stuff and I hear bits of stuff, and basically the public are not aware that this is going on at all. It doesn't mean that they can't find out. Most of the stuff, for instance, about what I talk about to these people interacting with, I've found out not just by joining dots, but you have to start by looking at the source documents. And the system, what they're doing is, I don't think it's complicated. Last word to you anyway, Chris.
Well, thanks. Well, really, you're right. It is a very simple system, but it's so simple that people don't understand. That's the big thing. It's right in their face. And I remember Dave Starbuck, who was there's two Dave Starbucks. There's one from up north. There's one up north I'm talking about. He was a comedy illusionist, and he said that what he did in his acts, his illusions, he noticed that governments were doing exactly the same. There's hiding things in plain view and things like that. And all the techniques he used, he could see being used in society. So really, what we have in power that's over us are illusionists. That's really what they are. And we are living in an illusion. And I think people are kind of happy in that illusion. They don't want, it's like if a person's in a prison for so long, I say, well, what do I want to be released for? You know, I have 3 meals a day and I'm quite happy in this cell. And that's what people seem to be like. It's strange. And I think they've been conditioned into it. But you're quite right. It is a very, very simple system. And how we're going to break it? Well, I think, again, you're right, with truth. That's the only thing. And also counter-subversion, using their own subversion techniques against them, finding a way of turning it around and back on them. Because whenever you look through history, in wars and battles, whenever, perfect examples during World War II, the Russians studied blitzkrieg, and they did the same back on the German army, and the German army wondered what the heck had actually hit them. So, because their enemy doesn't expect to have the same back on them. So perhaps we should study ideological subversion a bit more and use counter-subversion against the enemy. That's it, basically.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I think watching these ex-Soviets is very good because and Russians have an intellectual way of putting it across, which has been lost in the West. It's not that there's anything special about what those guys were saying about Thunberg. They were being brutally honest, and we have been taken away from that kind of language and direct speak.
Yes,
and that is a huge problem, because it means that you can't tell the truth. The truth will not be accepted, and then what happens is you get demonized, and you start. I mean, the thing is with it that a lot of people will start thinking, well, maybe I'm a bad person. But it takes quite a lot of fortitude, and it's a kind of ongoing process. That's what I find interesting about it. Whereas all these sort of things that have happened to me, like going through the courts and what I found out about the way police were operating, the way they're operating with private security, the way that it appears that the security services operate within the so-called protest movement. All these things are fascinating, because when you look at it on a higher level, the people who are involved with it believe they're doing the right thing. Now, the point is, when it infringes on my individual inalienable rights, then I have a huge problem with that. And when I see corruption or something happens, which is, I mean, I think it's about life experience. A lot of these, these hive mind people, I'll call them, they kind of drift through life until something happens, and then that kind of gives them a shock, and then they try and get over it. But a lot of people don't learn from this stuff. I mean, the thing is that when I was trying to defend this case in the Crown Court, because of what happened to me in the corruption within the police, a lot of people said, you're not going to win. Well, it wasn't really about winning. It was about finding out where the corruption was coming from. And I found out certain things which actually made a big difference, like the Crime Stoppers issue, which was a massive thing. Now, that's not going to help the person who's been framed by the police, but overall, it's given me unique insight, which I can then pass on. And that is, to me, what it's all about. It's like these interactions I find really fascinating, because years ago, I used to be very apprehensive about it. When you start off, you think, oh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? So it starts off with parking tickets, goes to council tax. Then the next thing is you're cutting clamps off vehicles and all the rest of it. And you're doing this kind of thing. Then I got into things happened in the higher courts. I didn't do anything wrong, but I was helping people who'd been stitched up. Then my friend got stitched up, and really badly. And now I know how it works. And the thing is that people don't understand what the corruption is. In Britain, the corruption is concealed. In a totalitarian country, it's open corruption. So you will have to pay bribes. To me, that's better. And I'll tell you why. Because people know that the system is corrupt. Here, they believe it's not corrupt, and that is extremely dangerous. I'll leave it at that, I think.
Well, excellent program. And again, I'd like to thank everybody for being very, very patient at the beginning of this program with our technical problems. There's something wrong with the live stream tonight, and I don't know. Everything. I mean, the Bark is telling.
Oh, he's gone. Well, that's fantastic, isn't it? Isn't that really funny that when Chris made the point that it's all gone wrong tonight, it actually went wrong? I think he's actually coming back in. I'll let him say goodbye to everyone.
He's going down.
The devil. I mean, fancy that.
See, Exhibit A. That was what happened with the live stream. I don't know what's wrong with tonight.
However, thanks to everyone for joining in. These will get better as we go along. I think we've had some good focused moments here. We got off to a very bumpy start there, but it's nothing that I'm not used to by now. I was on Richie Allen's show earlier on. That was quite good. Had a very good chat with Richie. A bit tired now. Been at it all day, actually. I met a friend of mine, Kevin, this morning, where we're talking about the same sort of thing. So it's been a very interesting and informative day. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Thanks to Chris. And I'll be back on with Chris tomorrow, 7 p.m., isn't it, Chris?
That's right, yes, 7 o'clock on Eric Von Essex on YouTube.
That's right. Thanks a lot, everybody, and good night.
Good night.